Let's write our first shape template. And what we'll do is that we'll copy the layout shape template from the default theme and use it in our own theme. This will be a simple example where you can start easily. So let's go to the theme here, still in the full orchard source, and here we have layout.cs.html. Let's actually just copy this, and let's go to our own solution now. And remember that we have created our own theme here, and well, that also has a manifest, like the themes that are built into Orchard. But well, there's nothing really interesting on it yet. I would just keep it as such. And it also has a layout.liquid file in it. We'll work in Razor now, so this automatically generated liquid file won't really be necessary, so I will just remove it. And now I will add a liquid file, and yeah, you have multiple options for this here. I tend to use just add class quickly for everything here because, well, it's a second to remove what's generated in here, but it's easier to get to. Oops, I mistyped HTML. And now we have our first Razor HTML here. Now, we have a couple of issues, and one of the issues is that we don't really see IntelliSense for either of these Orchard-specific things. Although, in the references, we actually have a couple of useful Orchard references already. So, what's the issue? The issue is that we also have to import those the relevant namespaces into our templates. So let's go back to the full Orchard source code and let's copy something from here. Maybe we can learn a lot. And there is this view imports file. This is standard ASP.NET Core MVC. The interesting thing here is that, well, this contains pretty much everything that we need except for the menu. We won't really deal with menus yet. Yeah, so let's also copy this. Alternatively, I can also just copy the file. So let me open the folder here. And let's open it here. This will be our file, and let's go to our own solution, and let's open the view folders there as well. That will be the second file. Oops. That will be the second file. That will be the second file. And now let's put 2 and 2 together. Alright, and back to our solution. We have few imports now here. We won't need Orchard core.menu, we won't use it yet. So that's it. Now let's see what happens. Well, we still don't really get IntelliSense, but that's because probably something was a bit messed up when I first mistyped the name of the file. In any case, if we reopen it, now you see we actually have proper IntelliSense. The view parts are actually indeed needed. So that's good. Let's make this a bit simpler though, because we don't have everything that's necessary here. Well, we will talk about scripts and styles later, so I would just keep everything unstyled for now. So let me remove everything that has anything to do with scripts or styles. We don't have a shortcut icon here. That's just a file that you can put into the web root. So let me also remove that one. Well, we don't have a login menu either, but that actually as you can see, doesn't come from the theme. That comes from somewhere else. And we also have a login menu here. That's also something that's implemented in the default theme. We don't need that either. The rest can remain. Well, actually, let me go back. I mistakenly removed these. These we actually need. Why? Because these are the scripts and style and link inclusions, but these resources tags are actually rendering included style sheets and scripts here, and also meta tags and everything else. So let's leave it there. Same for food scripts. This is something for Orchard's resource management, which we'll also talk a bit about later. So that's enough for now. Let's also start the application and let's see what actually happens. Now, remember that we have our theme added here to the web project. Well, we didn't actually add it anywhere because that was already provided to us by the code generation templates. But do note that if you add a new theme or a new module, for example, that will be needed. Well, yeah, again, the login menu we won't actually need. So let's restart the application again, and let's see what happens. And we are back to the blog, but this is only the case because we haven't yet enabled our theme. So let's actually do that. Still, we have to log in with admin password, admin passwords. This was because you were looking. And let's make the theme current. And by the way, there is also documentation about how you can override shape templates on the Orchard documentation site. This is a lot more than just a layout shape template, but to check it out, there are lots of details. We'll also check them out a bit later too. So let's go to our theme and let's make the Dojo Course theme current. And I already know that this will be beautiful. So let's see. Yes, it is. There is no CSS, it's just simple things. Beautiful. But it works. This is, well, our theme. So that's good, but we haven't yet done anything useful. So let's actually do that. We will use the first piece of Orchard's API here directly, and that will be localization. Because, well, we have our layouts here. Let's display some text. Let's display some messages to the user. And of course, that's trivial in itself. What makes it a bit less trivial, still very simple, is that you have to care about localization. Well, you may say that, okay, but my site will be only in English or whatever language. I still encourage you to take that extra half second every time you display something to users to make it localizable. Because that way, if you happen to change your mind, or if you will reuse the same module later in a web app that actually does need to be localized, then it will be very hard to change it otherwise. So we will write some localized strings. The same technique that Orchard uses behind the scenes, and that the localization module extends. Now, let's display some text here, like classic thing from the early 2000s. We can display a welcome message or something to the user. Well, maybe we can display it somewhere here between the messages and the body zone. So let's display a hello world, of course. And how you display a localized string here is that you call into this T. This is, by the way, not something Orchard specific. I think actually that it is called the, and how it works, it did come from Orchard 1, and it was adapted into ASP.NET Core. But in the end, this is ASP.NET Core's localization infrastructure. We are just utilizing it here. And well, how you write a localized string is like this. You simply wrap it into this T, and that's it. While the basics of this come from ASP.NET Core, Orchard does provide the actual implementation for localization, namely in form of PO files. We have seen crowding in the very beginning, how you can localize strings that are in Orchard itself. You can localize your own UI strings from your own application in the same way. And now that we have hello here, we can also go back to the layout and refresh, and let's see what happens. Well, it is indeed there. And well, I can actually do a trick and put this into the left-hand side and this to the right-hand side. So it's a bit more convenient changing it all the time. And notice that I refreshed the page and everything just, bam, was renewed. That is because Razor runtime compilation happened. The Razor compiler compiled this into C# and everything on itself right on the refresh. That is a very useful development feature. It comes from ASP.NET Core, or rather Razor, just worth noting that it's also in effect during Orchard development as well. All right, so we have this simple message about what if we want to, well, greet the user? Well, first of all, where is the user coming from? Well, we have a model here, but it's dynamic. That is actually the shape. So maybe the shape actually contains something about the user. Some shapes do. Well, those shapes that actually deal with displaying something about the user. But instead, we can take a look at the user property. And the user property, standard ASP.NET Core again, has this identity name. So we can display the user's name like this, but of course it would be better to wrap it into the message. And so like hello world, instead of hello world, let's say hello name, exclamation mark. Now, you might be tempted to just concatenate the strings, but the issue would be there that concatenated dynamic strings can't be localized. Remember that how localization happens is that you have a string, a constant string here in your code that is extracted, and then that is served to the translators who actually make the localized versions of those strings, and those strings will be then generated into localization packages, PO files. So if I say something like plus here, or anything like this, this can be translated because this is C#. Now, what you can do instead is that you can put placeholders into localized strings and feed the dynamic parameters, the parameters to them like in string.format. So, for example, instead of this, what you would do is that you would write something like hello and then this format parameter and then hello name. This again comes from ASP.NET Core, works the same, everything will work. So let's try it now. And let's refresh. We have hello admin, that's great. So now somebody who works on the localization of this site can actually translate this string. If in another language the order of words would be different, like first the name and then something equivalent to hello, then this still would work. They would just need to move this format parameter around. So very simple. Well, one thing here. This relies on there being a user. As if somebody is not logged in, we would get a no reference exception. We can just quickly mitigate that and only display this message if there is actually a user. And for that, I will just wrap this whole thing into an if. Of course, there are lots of other ways to achieve the same thing, but I will just say if the user is not null, oops, let's display this message. And now we have the same message there. So that's great. We learned something new from localization still. And there is one last thing about localization, about writing user-facing strings, and that's about a pluralization. Because this message here is a flat message. There is no variance in how it should be structured. It's just that we need a placeholder for the user's name. Now, there is a difference though if this placeholder is not just for a name, but for a number of things that you are talking about. Like you are displaying a list of blog posts or whatever, and you want to display how many blog posts are there in a sentence. Now in English, what you would say if there is one blog post is that here is one blog post. If there are multiple blog posts, like 3, then what you would say is that here are 3 blog posts. So there is a difference. And this is just a small difference in English, but in other languages, even the word order can be different. So, long story short, you can't make the decision here in code what should happen in the end in that language you possibly don't even know. So we need to employ some pluralization, and that happens with something called t.plural. So let's pretend that we are displaying blog posts. So let's say that we have a blog post count of 3. And then let's display the same message that I mentioned. So let's display there are that many blog posts. Now, what we can use is not yet here, is t.plural. But the thing is that we'll need to add an extension method for that. We'll use an extension method for that, and we'll need to import a namespace for it. Now, we can import namespaces here at the top, just as usual, or we can make the namespace work for every template in this project, and we can also import it here in view imports. So let's write it in the view imports. We commonly leave one line break empty at the end of the file. And well, there is a namespace called Microsoft.asp.NET Core.mbc.localization. You may ask, how do I know this from the top of my head? And the answer is that I don't. I cheated. But don't tell this to anybody. And now we have this plural extension methods here. So what we can do now is that we can use a count parameter here to tell how many of these things are here, and then we can supply a singular and a plural form, well, in another override. So let's supply the blog post count first, and then we can add the singular and the plural form. And these can be, again, just static strings. So the single can be something like, here is one blog post. And then the plural one can be, here are, and again, we can use this string.format-like parameter. Here are this many blog posts. And that's it. Now, you may be tempted to use the lazy format that you, I'm sure, have seen a lot of times in applications, that here are 3 blog posts and then the S is in brackets. So imagine if there is just one blog post and it's singular. Of course, you can do that. The game is not that easy in every language, though, so that thing might not be simple to translate. But here are 3 blog posts, and if we actually change this to 1, then here we have just one blog post. So we successfully created different versions of the string based on how many items are in there. And that's about overriding the basic layout shape template. And we played around a bit with localization because that's really very important. All your user-facing strings should be localized strings. And that's how you do them from templates. In a later tutorial, we'll see how to do them from C#, from controllers, drivers, and what drivers will be, we'll also talk about a bit later.